Welcome. The presentation tonight is Insect Conservation Beyond the Home Garden. We're lucky enough to have Karin Jokela from Xerxes Society. The host is the St. Croix Oak Savanna Chapter of Wild Ones Native Landscaping. I'm Howard Marcus. I'm a St. Croix Oak Savanna Wild Ones co-president along with Roger Miller. Roger and I are both Washington County Master Gardeners, and this certainly fits into that realm also. A little housekeeping, if there's questions for the speaker, then send them to chat, send the chat to everyone, and we'll get to them at the end of the program. And if there's problems with Zoom, then send a chat to host, and I'll see if I can figure out what's going on. Please have your mute on and your video off. If you're not a member of the St. Croix Oak Savanna Chapter of Wild Ones or some other chapter of Wild Ones, depending on where you live, I encourage you to join. It'll help support programs like this, and there's lots of good information both from the chapter and from national Wild Ones. And so if you want to join, please send a chat to Roger. I'm going to switch to the next page for Karin's bio and the program description a little bit. We'll look at it for a minute or so, and then I'll stop sharing the screen and Karin will start her program. Probably most of you figured out by now that it's a lot easier to just take a photo with your cell phone camera than to try to take notes on slides that are going by so fast. And also, I just wanted to thank everybody for attending. And so I'm going to switch to the second page now, and we'll just look at it for a minute or two, and then we'll start the program. Karin doesn't know this, but I also went to Iowa State, but I went decades before she went. I went in the late 70s. So but that was more algal ecology and not stuff that you can actually see and identify by just walking around. You have to use a microscope for my stuff. So it's a little harder to impress people.
I did not know that. That's great.
No, yeah, that was a long time ago. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing, and then Karin will start her presentation.
Okay, let's see if this works. Thank you, Howard and Roger. Looks like you can see just the screen and no notes.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to spend time with Wild Ones members. When Roger first approached me about this talk, I thought, well, do I really need to talk to you? Because you're kind of our closest allies, our on the ground partners. So many people approach me at conferences and other sort of meetings, and they ask, does Xerxes have like local chapters? And I have to sadly report that we don't, but that they should reach out to the local Wild Ones chapters, because those are our people, so to speak. So when Roger asked me to speak, I thought, well, what can I talk about that might be, new to some of you, because many of you are not only proficient, but just excellent gardeners and outreach specialists with all things native landscaping. So anyway, I thought I would talk to you a little bit about some of the things that Xerxes is doing, and by extension, kind of our coalition, our collaborators, our members are helping to support some of the insect conservation that is not happening in the home garden. So my name is Karin Jokela, like Howard said. I'm a pollinator conservation planner, and I'm a partner biologist for the NRCS. I'll explain a little bit about that in a few slides here. So the first thing I'll do, let's see if I can get this to advance, is just say a little bit about the Xerxes Society. I'm guessing many of you are familiar with what we do, but we are a nonprofit wildlife conservation organization that works to protect invertebrates and their habitats. We are a little over 50 years old now. We started as a butterfly conservation organization, but have since kind of expanded our scope to include invertebrate conservation of all kinds, anything without a backbone. We take our name from the Xerxes blue butterfly shown here in the image. It's the first butterfly to go extinct due to human-influenced habitat loss that we think of in the United States. We have programs, all kinds of different programs. Our largest is our Pollinator and Agricultural Biodiversity Program. That's the program that houses me and many of my coworkers. We have an endangered species program doing a lot of cool work on bumblebees and freshwater mussels and fireflies and monarchs. We have a pesticide protection team that really works directly with municipalities, but also really supports other program areas so that when I work with farmers, I can provide the best guidance on how to protect habitat on farms from pesticides. We have urban programs and some other programs. This is a talk I'm actually going to go into some of these program areas. Usually this is where it ends in some of my talks, but I'm actually going to describe a little bit more about these in a few slides. I thought I would show you, I don't know, I think this is useful to see kind of our geographic scope. When I started with the organization in 2017, we had about, somewhere around 50 people. And now, and this geography is changing just about every week, it seems. We're somewhere in the ballpark of 80 to 90 different people. In short, we're expanding quickly. We're growing our geography. I think our next region is going to be, we're starting to do some work in the Southeast, which is really exciting. I should say a little bit about my particular role. I'm a partner biologist for the NRCS. That's the Natural Resources Conservation Service. That's the branch of the USDA that's responsible for helping farmers with all things related to conservation. It could be soil health, pollinator habitat. It could be erosion control, anything related to water quality, a lot of things like that. I provide a lot of training to conservation staff, and I also work directly with farmers, and I can do seed mix design and habitat evaluations, and I do a whole lot of field days. And lately I've been revising a lot of technical documents for NRCS. So just a little sense of what I do and a lot of people in the pollinator program do. And then before I go into our main content, I really just need to acknowledge upfront how we don't do any of this work in isolation. We're this huge family of supporters, a lot of Xerxes Society members that support our work. We couldn't do this work without you. We have lots of foundations and corporations that support our work with lots of scientists and researchers all over the world, really. And if you feel so inclined, if you're not already a member, and I hope that this talk could compel you to become a member, but donors really make our work possible. We are member supported, somewhat like public radio. If you support the program, then you can get a gift like this habitat sign. It would be like a certain donation, you get this kind of gift. One of the other perks of becoming a member is that you get semi-annual magazines. These are kind of a classic. We get 2 of them a year. You get all kinds of updates on the latest research in insect conservation, kind of staff interviews, changes to what we're doing, just kind of really, they're just little treasures. I love them. Because I'm a member as well. So I'm going to start with this premise. This is kind of what motivates our work. We at the Xerxes Society believe that the fate of the world's insects is inseparable from our own. So we care about soil health, we care about pest control, we care about ecological function. There's pretty much anything. If you care about the environment, you should be caring about the fate of insects, because these are animals that are helping with nutrient cycling and offering free pest control services. They're doing that valuable service of turning plant material into food for other animals. And of course, what I spend a lot of my time thinking about is that these animals are helping plants reproduce. And not just in, plants in wild landscapes, but also our food plants, the foods that I really care about eating, like all the colorful, interesting ones that provide a lot of minerals and nutrients. So if you've heard the Xerxes Society talk recently, you may have seen a slide sort of like this. Almost any pollinator talk has this kind of somewhere in the beginning, like there's a lot of research out there. Seemingly every week, a new paper is coming out showing that there are insect declines in abundance and diversity, and our insect pollinators are really all invertebrates are in trouble. But what I'm highlighting here is that the picture on the front, the paper on the front, declines in insect abundance and diversity. We know enough to act now. I just love that kind of subtitle. This is a paper that Matt Forrester and a couple of my coworkers and my executive director, Scott Black, helped to co-write. And this is the paper that I'm going to use to kind of structure the rest of the talk. So in that paper, we outline a few different spaces, sort of levels for action. We recommend policy changes in these levels. And I've outlined the 4 levels here, and you can see that first level is something that you're really familiar with as Wild Ones members, that we all can make really important changes in our own garden, private landscapes, converting lawns to species, promoting, pollinator plants, and engaging our neighbors in that work. But there's also these other 3 areas that you might be interested to hear kind of what Xerxes is doing in these realms, and also ways that you might, I'm hoping that if I go over some of the ways that Xerxes is working in these spaces, you might find little points that might resonate with you, and that you can imagine you could also tap into this type of work in these other action levels, I guess. So I do want to start with the gardens and private property work, because it is so important. Because as you all know, this is the space where a lot of us turn into ecologists or environmentalists, where these gardens kind of nurture us, and we can transform them and really have like really positive cultural transformation. If we're gardening with native perennial plants, we're converting lawn spaces to something more useful, something that brings in life, native trees, edible fruits and vegetables for us. Even when we do have some lawn spaces that we use for picnics or soccer or camping, maybe those are flowering lawns with violets or some tame clovers. By contributing to this work, we could join in a larger movement to create a homegrown national park. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this idea. I just love it because I have young kids, and we don't get, and I also live on a farm, and we don't get off our farm very much. So this is their national park that they're visiting. So more reasons to invest in garden and private backyard change. I couldn't resist lifting up a couple of Wild Ones landscapes. This is from Julia Venata in the Twin Cities. I just love her total takeover of the of her lot. There's no space untouched. There's no lawn, and what I like about this picture is that people are engaged in the space. It's not nature that they're stepping away from and are removed from. They're involved in this space, and it's beautiful and functional, and brings in, I'm sure, a lot of attention. This is a picture from July. This is a picture of a different angle in August, abundant flowers. Here's another picture with lots of different textures and colors and spring blooms from Vicky Bonk. Also, what I love is the signage she has in there, and she probably maybe didn't even plan for this, but rock crevices could create a lot of nesting habitat opportunities for pollinators. Another Wild Ones member, Leslie Pilgrim, shared these photos with me, some photos of her yard that support pollinators year round. One of the things I love about Leslie, because she's an artist, she comes up with these cool signs saying, nesting insects, we left last year's leaves and 15 inches of plant stems to provide important nesting habitat for insects and bees. So she's interpreting what she's doing in her space, which is great. And when we work in our individual gardens, sometimes you kind of run out of space, or you have energy to move into other spaces. I would encourage you, and I know Wild Ones members are already doing this, to connect your individual efforts and move into corridors where you're connecting the gardens and the habitat and the people. So the photo on the left is a photo that's a tiny little pocket garden right outside of a gas station. And you can see it kind of follows down the sidewalk, probably towards a residential lot, which has a larger garden. These are important corridors. The photo in the center there is a picture I really love from my friend Megan Manhattan. You can see in this photo, instead of volunteer invasive species showing up on the side of a corridor, instead she's observing native species like this Polemonium, what do you call it, Jacob's ladder, that is volunteering because there's enough native habitat along the corridor that those seeds are moving around, which is great. So yeah, corridors are really important for connecting these individual efforts. Some of you may be familiar with the Nokomis Naturescape. That's another great way for you to kind of take your gardening skills beyond the home boundaries and bring it into your community and beautify your community, make it more functional, provide education opportunities, interpretation and awareness. I mean, these are just like launching points for so much other conservation that we see in the landscape. When you're doing these individual efforts and community efforts, I think it's really important to create some signage, whether you purchase it or you get a sign from Xerxes by becoming a member, or you create your own. Some of the best signs I've seen are the ones that are like homemade, like this one in the top: native pollinator meadow, no mowing, no pesticides, nature's way, advocate for Xerxes Society. Those are the sweetest ones in my opinion, but they really help explain what's going on, because this kind of gardening style can look a little unconventional, sometimes perceived as a little messy. If you have the gifts, this and the interest, this is a really great way to engage beyond your home garden, is to move into other community spaces like a school or a library or community centers where you can continue that interpretive work. You can share seeds, you can share plants. You know, there's it's still a little bit like the individual effort, but they're just kind of individual efforts starting to combine and really showcasing how these spaces can be like outdoor classrooms and provide lessons, like lessons, year-round lessons about our natural heritage and our connection with the land. And this is where I'm going to start walking you through some of the Xerxes efforts. So one of our efforts that just launched, I don't know, maybe a year or two ago, is the Xerxes Kids program, otherwise known as the ExKids. It's a program developed for students or kids aged 3rd through 5th grade, and it can be completed by individuals or in groups. So you work through an activity book to save invertebrates, and then you receive a badge upon completion. So this has been really, really fun to see stories of this program being used in classrooms. It's also available in Spanish as well. We also launched a couple years ago a program called the Xerxes Ambassadors Program, and this is kind of like a fancy volunteer program where there's a lot of vetting involved, a lot of interviews, and a lot of just making sure that these volunteers who work for Xerxes, who are so passionate and who know our work inside and out, have opportunities to expand our reach in spaces that we don't have the capacity to go yet. And so we have recruited 73 ambassadors so far. One of them is in Minneapolis. Some of you may know her. She's a wildlife member. We're in 29 states and 64 cities. I should point out that we are not currently accepting new ambassador applications. We're in kind of like ambassador program, pilot program 2.0, where we started in the Portland area. Now we have this broad reach, but it could very quickly become unwieldy since we have an extensive hiring kind of like recruiting process. So we're going to see how this goes. I have no doubt that it'll be successful. And stay tuned for future expansions if this is something that's of interest to you. We also have ways to participate in community science. So there's the Bumblebee Watch, which we launched in 2013, I believe. I'll go through some of these different community science projects in subsequent slides here. But with Bumblebee Watch, it's sort of like, it's a little bit akin to iNaturalist, but specifically for bumblebees. And you can take photos and submit incidents of bumblebees to Bumblebee Watch, and you can see them out on maps and so forth. It can be done anywhere. We also have some Bumblebee Atlases now in 15 states, where you get some training and you adopt a square and you do surveys throughout the summer, and then you submit your data at the end of the season. And we just launched a Firefly Atlas as well, just literally a couple weeks ago. And from what I've explored on the website, it seems to have a very similar structure to the Bumblebee Watch kind of approach. But within it, there's also a way to get some training and adopt certain survey routes for certain at-risk fireflies that we need more information about. So with Bumblebee Watch, that was kind of our first level community science, formerly known as, or maybe equally known as, citizen science programs. We launched it in 2013. It's now over 100. We have over 100,000 different bumblebee observations on there, with a lot of participation. And I should say, and I'm going to repeat this idea throughout the presentation, that we don't work by ourselves. We work with all these partners to do this work. Bumblebee Watch is really great because you can submit your photos, and then later on, experts will verify what the species was to the best, I mean, depending on the image quality, but usually they can verify to the exact species. So then from Bumblebee Watch, we launched a few specific programs called Bumblebee Atlases. Some of them have been up and running for a few years now. Some of them are just getting started, as you can see on this map. You can see we're expanding into the Southeast this coming year, as well as into Iowa, which is really, really exciting. And one thing I will just point out here is that, you know, these atlases are really changing the data that we're collecting. So these are some, this is a map from Bumblebee Watch data from the years of 2014 to 2017. So each one of these dots represents an image from somebody uploaded an image of a bumblebee. And you can kind of see there's some patterns where people are, uploading images where they live in kind of population centers. And there's some real gaps in central United States. So there are bumblebees in those spaces, but we don't know very much about those bumblebees. So that is kind of one of the reasons that, gave us a reason to launch these atlases in the Central Great Plains, for example. So you can see here, this is a slide that I grabbed from some of my coworkers. And full disclosure, this is not my program area. So I'm providing information about programs that, I hope I don't misspeak, but I think that what I'm saying here is that, so you can see the blue outlines of states that have been in the program. In 2022, we launched the California Atlas and one in North Dakota, South Dakota, and Kansas. But the data on this map don't include 22 data. So when we get the 2022 data, you'll see a lot more coverage in the Great Plains. But you can see it's already changing quite a bit. We're filling in states because people are adopting grid cells where they weren't currently surveying. So that's pretty exciting. And you can see just over time from 2014 to even 2022. And again, once we get that 22 data in, you'll see a leap with not only the states from Idaho to Minnesota, but we'll also see a whole lot more participation and data points and observations from California, Kansas, North Dakota, and South Dakota. We're learning a lot through community science. And then, the data that we collect informs conservation outcomes and guidance that we create. These are just a couple of examples of publications that came out in 2021 following the data collection from our community science programs. So again, there will be links to these that you can go search online afterwards. And they're like species accounts and ideas about conservation approaches for each one of the species. And like I said, we just launched a Firefly Atlas. It's definitely worth exploring. You can find more about firefly species that occur in our region, explore what data we do have about them, their life history, and maybe even start collecting some information that could be used for future conservation efforts. I'm just so excited about what our knowledge about fireflies is going to be in the next 5 years after people start participating in this. Here's just a couple of documents that came out as we're building up this Firefly Atlas and doing the research to figure out which species might be imperiled and trying to gather some baseline data. And they're just useful guidance. The one on the right, the purple guidance document, is much thicker, goes over individual species. And then this fact sheet on the left just is an easy kind of what we should be thinking about to protect fireflies in terms of how we think our lighting practices. So back to that Forrester et al. Paper where we outlined 4 different action spaces, right? There's gardens and private spaces, and then there's nations, states, and cities, and what they can be doing in terms of policy and other kinds of ways to support biodiversity conservation. So this is where I'm going to start talking about those recommendations. One of the things that Xerxes has, we didn't start it. A very visionary woman named Phyllis started this down in southeastern United States, and then after some success, she approached Xerxes and asked Xerxes to adopt the program. And since Xerxes has adopted it, this is an initiative that's expanded all over the United States, and I think even into Canada. We call it Bee City USA, but it's really an initiative that has 2 sister initiatives, Bee Campus USA and Bee City USA. To become an affiliate community, you have to form a committee, you have to create habitat, you have to reduce your pesticide use, and you have to host outreach activities. There's more detail with that, but those are the 3 key things to do. And here's a map that I pulled a few days ago of some of the recent affiliates or of our existing affiliates across the United States. And there are some that are, into the Caribbean even. So these are just affiliates of this specific program. I know there are many municipalities and cities in Minnesota that have also adopted sort of parallel pollinator resolutions. So I know we have a lot of commitments in different parts of the country that aren't necessarily reflected here, but this is an option. Xerxes also engages in a lot of policy advocacy work. It's really impossible for me to give an overview of all of it. I'm just kind of cherry picking a few things here, things that we work on. Whatever we do, it's always grounded in science, the most up-to-date science. And then we also try to interpret that science to provide practical solutions that can be adopted at a lot of different scales, local, regional, and national. So we have model policies for local groups to adopt pollinator protection plans, ways to reduce, language for reducing pesticides. Our endangered species program for sure has been advocating for endangered species protection that's the core of our work at Xerxes. Our pollinator team has been collaborating with all kinds of coalitions to put pollinators as a priority in the Farm Bill. And we've been collaborating with NRCS for close to 20 years now. So we're very involved in these conversations that are shifting policy. And then, through all of this work, we're just raising the profile of invertebrate conservation and engaging audiences that care about this issue or that issue, but it's all connected to biodiversity conservation, really. Here's just a recent example from a couple weeks ago, maybe even last week, recent examples of some ways that Xerxes taps into local policy work. So a number of states actually don't consider invertebrates wildlife. And this has come up, and this really limits our ability to do meaningful work for monarchs or other pollinators in the states. And so a bill has been introduced in Nevada, and we rallied along with a lot of other partners to get signatures and people to support this bill to basically interpret wildlife to include invertebrates that they weren't considered wildlife previously. And that, if Nevada approves this bill, then that vastly expands our possibility for working on meaningful change, really, for landscapes, for pollinator conservation across Nevada. And then if Nevada adopts this kind of legislation, then that is precedent for other states that surprisingly operate similarly. So when we put out an action alert like this that gets picked up sometimes by other media outlets like these New York Times articles, the first one that came out was this one on the right, Our Butterflies Wildlife, It Depends on Where You Live. And that spurred a conversation. It's like a student opinions conversation. Do bugs deserve more respect? And that generated a really interesting conversation with young people. So just little tidbits of some of our policy work here. I'm going to move into, remember, there's the third area of work is our working lands. And this is the space that I'm a little bit more comfortable in because this is where I work within the Xerxes Society, which is with farmers. And within agricultural landscapes. We believe in rewilding agriculture to bring nature back onto the farm. The recommendations in the paper suggest for this space is to manage farms, ranches, and forests to incorporate more insect diversity, to try to move towards an agricultural model that is more climate friendly, where it doesn't use as much water, is more resilient to extreme weather. It's more diverse, it's regenerative, it's not as vulnerable to when you have a big monoculture across the landscape, it can be very vulnerable to extreme weather events, but if you have some diversity, you have resilience. So reducing the use of pesticides is a big of our work at Xerxes, and also one of our key recommendations for working within agricultural lands. And then we also recommend incentivizing change. And so that whether that's just providing more technical support for farmers to adopt, or providing financial support for farmers who either want to adopt or are already doing these practices, to reward them. So those are all some of the recommendations in the Forester paper, We Know Enough to Act Now, for working lands. I wanted to give a couple of examples of the ways that Xerxes is participating in this. And just as a baseline, there's a clear need that pollinators are important to agriculture. So many of our crops are pollinator dependent. Those crops generally are high value, and just cherished by people because of their nutrition, because of their taste. You know, they're really important. So pollinators are important to agriculture. It sort of goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. And I wanted to say, so in our pollinator and agricultural biodiversity program, we have these two kind of fearless leaders, Eric and Mace. And I'm highlighting this, one, because these are people who have been leaders in this movement for decades. They helped co-write these publications that many of you are probably familiar with. Seeing these publications and reading them is what drove me to go into graduate school. Long before I became a staff at Xerxes Society, I saw these and I just fell in love. Like, this is the work I need to do. What kind of research do I need to do to support this? So these are, I'm just highlighting Eric and Mace because I really think they, along with some of the other early staff, like some of you may know Sarah Fultz-Jordan, Jennifer Hopwood. These are key Xerxes staff who are kind of visionary in how to diversify agriculture to support pollinators. I'm also highlighting these two co-directors because within our program, we sort of separate out two sectors. So Eric is largely responsible for supply chain kind of work, working with like the private sector, and Mace is really our lead on all kind of agency partnerships with NRCS and that kind of work. So the first thing I'm going to do is give a little overview of some of our private sector work. And this is an area that I'm not part of, but I'll try to do my best to give an overview. And one program that I think is particularly interesting is this program called Be Better Certified. It's a program that we launched several years ago. And the idea is to partner with farmers and food companies to conserve bees and pollinators, and to identify retailers and businesses that clearly are supporting farms, but they're a few steps removed when you get to the consumer. But they want to show that they care about pollinator habitat on farms, and they want some way to convey that to consumers. So like many other certifications, like the organic certification, for example. So this is sort of a parallel certification that we launched in 2017. It arose out of a need for some kind of label and also for some standardization, because there are a lot of claims that, you know, something is bee friendly or pollinator friendly. And we wanted to really make some meaning out of that and ground it in science. So we've been working with a whole bunch of different brands and corporations for a number of years. The idea was financially supported from a collaboration from the Xerxes Society, Oregon Tilth, and NRCS. So a pilot program was launched, and now we have a number of farms and labels out there on actual food products. This is to, you know, carve out a space to make a label that is meaningful and verified. So Be Better Certified is third-party certified. So that's where Oregon Tilth comes in. It's not just Xerxes saying that we approve. It's a real rigorous program that any you know, participating farm has to participate in, and then a third party comes through and actually certifies it. So to be participating in the program, you have to create or maintain a high quality pollinator habitat that's at least 5% of your certified crop acreage. Most of that has to be permanent perennial habitat. I think maybe 1% can be like a flowering cover crop or something. You have to reduce risks to pesticides, and reduce that risk to bees. And there's, I mean, if you explore the guidance documents on the Be Better Certified website, it is intense what's required for the pesticide mitigation. You have to provide nesting sites, and you also have to basically not use bumblebees, like open, I'm blanking on the language here, but you cannot release managed bumblebees into open fields because of the risk that some of those bumblebees may be sharing diseases with native local populations. It's based in science, has these rigorous standards, it's third-party verified, and it comes up with these 2 different seals. So if all the products, like a blueberry is for sale, blueberry package, you could label it as Be Better certified just on the left, or if certain ingredients are Be Better certified, it can be labeled on the right like that. For example, like here, we now have over 20,000 acres of farmland in this program, and you can actually start to see the label out on regular products in Costco and Trader Joe's and other places around the country. This is now I'm going to move into kind of the more public sector work that we do with farmers and conservation agencies. And one thing that I like to think about in this work is this quote, and I don't know exactly who to attribute it to, but that this idea that all land is wildlife habitat, only the quality differs. And so I like to approach farm habitat planning with that idea, because we often go onto a farm and people think that to support pollinators, they need to plant a prairie or pollinator meadow or something, but there are actually all these other features on a farm that actually provide habitat. Sometimes it's old snags, sometimes it's a riparian area, it can be temporary cover crops, it can be orchard understories, a variety of different spaces that people, especially farmers, may not have on their radar as pollinator conservation approaches. And so when we are out assessing habitat on a farm, these are things we want to keep in mind and protect what's already there before developing plans for new habitat. So that's kind of like the idealized visual, but there are these are real examples of farms that we've worked with that have implemented some of those practices, the flowering field rows, the nesting habitat, the cover crops. These can be all different scales, or even on urban farms you can see these features. And Xerxes staff, especially all of our partner biologists who work in a similar role to me, are every day of the year working with farmers and conservation staff to think about where to incorporate habitat on all these different kinds of lands, and to do it in a responsible way that's protecting the site from pesticides. So these are just a few examples of some of my coworkers in different spaces they work in. So Roger asked me to give a couple of case studies of some of the work that we're doing on working lands in the upper Midwest, particularly in the Geoglyphs area, which is some recent work that I've really enjoyed doing. The first study, or the first case study I'm going to go over, is not in the Geoglyphs area exactly. It's on the edge. It's in Dakota County, and it's probably the longest case study I'm going to talk about. But that's because there's such exemplary farmers. And this is a group of siblings called the Kimbers, or that's their last name. And Kurt on the left there, shown on the left, and Chris on the far right are the primary farmers. And they have a 240-acre farm in Dakota County. Kurt is a self-described serial activist, where he's very motivated to grow food for local consumption, to grow in such a way that's climate resilient, that's adaptive, and that's a model for what we could do in the future. I started conservation planning with them in 2017 when they were just transitioning the farm to organic. And then in 2019, we incorporated a whole bunch of pollinator habitat into some prairie strips. And so this is what it looked like at first. In 2017, just looking at an aerial map, we identified not a lot of habitat on the farm. You can even see some of the places where there's erosion. The problems that Kurt identified is that there was a lot of soil loss because of some slopes, and they're doing a lot of tillage because it's organic. So those are some of the in NRCS speak, this is called a resource concern. There's not enough habitat to attract beneficial insects. There's soil loss. So these are the problems that we identify, and then we inventory what's there. And then we've tried to figure out what are the deficiencies so that we can plan habitat in a really strategic way. So these are some of the deficiencies and the inventory. And then from there, we thought through a really strategic plan. We put in Kernza. Kernza is a crop, kind of an experimental crop. It's a perennial wheatgrass. So that is definitely experimental, but he put that in some spaces where once you put it in, you don't have to till for a few years. So that will protect the soil in those spaces. And then he also put in 19 acres of prairie strips, akin to the Iowa State Prairie Strips program. But what I really love about this particular farm is that it's an organic farm, and those strips are protected from nearby pesticide drift. So great placement in that sense. So that's what it looked like from the planning perspective. And that was in 2019 when it was actually seeded. Already in June of 2021, the aerial map was showing the footprint of this change. This is July of 2021 from a drone image that was taken. So these are still early years in establishment of the prairie planting, but already definitely making significant change. And they're also getting a lot of recognition for these changes. They're in 2021, we hosted a pollinator week. I don't know, kind of a to-do talking about how agencies are supporting farmers and what farmers can do to support pollinators. And it included a lot of great speakers. So Peggy Flanagan, Commissioner Tom Peterson, state agency folks from Bowser and from the Department of Ag were there, just really lifting up this type of farming. So I thought that was really encouraging and hopefully a real sign of change in the future. In 2022, we hosted another field day where their Kernza was now more mature. Their prairie strips were even more mature and really beautiful. This was in the middle of July. Inside the Kernza, they also intercropped alfalfa. So you can see in that image on the right, that's the Kernza wheatgrass, and you can sort of see the alfalfa blooming in there. And you can see our event tents in the background. And we were speaking under there, and in the background was this Kernza, and there were the whole farm was alive. There were swallows swooping in the air, presumably eating pollinators. But that's okay, it was alive. And then it just felt like a really exciting place to be, and a vision for what is possible for agriculture in the future. And Kurt closed the field day by saying, "We live in a paradise. Let's just hope we can hold on to it." So that's just one case study that I really love to lift up, because they do such good work. We've also been doing a lot of work in the driftless area. This is one farm that we've been working with called Bluff Farm. It's a small vegetable farm in Houston County. And we spent a couple of years doing site prep. So you can see these polygons that I kind of drew onto the aerial map. They wanted to put 3.5 acres into pollinator habitat those acres were in a really old hayfield that had been planted a long time ago. It's mostly introduced grasses, some old alfalfa and clover. And so we experimented with two different site preparation approaches, one using conventional herbicide, and the other field, the yellow polygon that was closer to her vegetable fields that we wanted to keep in organic practices. We used an organic site prep using a sorghum Sudan grass smother crop. So you can see Carrie's husband Charles there standing at the edge between those two approaches, those two site prep approaches, where he's staring at the tall sorghum Sudan grass with his back to the herbicide. And then it was planted. So this is a picture of it getting planted in November of, let's see, I guess that was November 2021. Yeah, November 2021. Yes, it's on the slide. And we used a mix that had over 100 different species. So Xerxes brought a little bit of financial contribution to this, but it was largely supported by a farm bill program called EQIP. So together we were able to make a really climate resilient seed mix that will tie together a lot of habitat in this landscape, and also you can see it's right on alongside a road. It will provide a lot of beauty and function to this area, and it will obviously provide a lot of support, services and beneficial insects and pollination to the crops. Another site that we worked on not far from there in Winona County is called Rocky Hill Bison Farm. This was such a fun project for me to work on. I was approached to work on this project because this is a farm that is participating in a program called CRP. It's the Conservation Reserve Program. It's essentially a program that pays farmers to take land that's vulnerable to erosion out of crop production and put it into something perennial, usually something native. And so this farm, they had row crops on these steep slopes, and instead of cropping it, they put it into the CRP. But their vision for this space was to put it into the program for 10 or 15 years. And then eventually when they had to get out of the program, they were going to start grazing it. So what we wanted to do was create a seed mix that would be really good for pollinators, for wildlife, that would establish well and be climate resilient and affordable given our certain program constraints and financial constraints. Put it in these strips along the edges of their field. And so for the first 10 years, it would be ungrazed. And after that 10 years, we would include they would introduce bison. So that was, I guess that was the site prep year. It was planted in the spring in 2021. And then in the fall of 2022, it was already establishing really, really well with a lot of the grasses that we wanted in there for bison forage. But it also had a lot of different species that would support monarchs, that would support rusty patch bumblebees, that would be resilient when we introduce grazers. As grazers like bison do things like this, and they create little trails, they create wallows. We wanted to have seeds in the seed bank that would be able to respond and not just create spaces where invasive or unwanted species come in. So this was a really, a mind-bending fun challenge for me. And Gail is just, I just work with the most amazing farmers. Gail is so inspiring. She says, during these challenging times, we're in need of hope. The calves will create the future of the species, and their offspring will enjoy our work in restoration. So visionary people I get to work with. Speaking of visionary people, Nettle Valley Farm, Dana Burtness down in Houston County. She grows pigs and hogs on pasture, which she grows up on flat land on this kind of the farthest western section there, just north of the house. But the rest of the acreage she has in this valley on the north kind of arch there is sort of old oak savanna. A lot of it is afforested, so a lot of trees growing into it that normally wouldn't have been there. Historically, it would have been oak savanna that was managed by fire, by grazing. It would have been not as densely forested. So what she's been doing with the assistance of a incubator farm models. She has incubator farmers stay on the farm, and they've been grazing those acres. They've been taking out trees. They've been putting in pasture mixes below the trees and creating a what she calls silvopasture by subtraction. So she's removing trees and she's making it more like an oak savanna. But what she's been doing in most of these areas on the western side and central part of these oak savannas is she's been planting a lot of introduced species that would be good for forage quality for grazers like sheep and cattle and that kind of thing. But what we've done to partner with her is to create this space over on this green area, 4-acre parcel, to do the similar kind of woody species control, like the invasive species of buckthorn and honeysuckle and that kind of thing. Remove some canopy trees as well. So it's really just the big oaks. And then we're seeding the native understory mix. And it will be grazed. So it is a working land space. But it will receive more of a conservation grazing kind of stocking rate and frequency. So grazing more for woody control, but not so much for production. So this is kind of what it looked like. We did some forestry mowing, and then this spring actually we'll be seeding it with natives and hopefully getting some hook action with some grazers, continuing to trample that in and graze resprouts of buckthorn. This photo was taken in the fall, and I believe she's been doing even more canopy removal over the winter. And we did a field day there in July of 2021, and the Land Stewardship Project did a podcast episode about it. So if you wanted to learn more about the incubators or the pollinator projects we were working on there, you can check that out. Moving on from some of those case studies, I wanted to get to that fourth and final kind of level where we suggest change for home gardens, for nation states, cities, for working land, and for natural areas. Xerxes Society is working in this space as well, not surprising. We are working in this space to manage for biodiversity in nature preserves and parks, roadsides, rights of way, providing guidance, providing policy recommendations, and so forth. One of the areas that we work in a lot is, thanks to my amazing coworker, Jennifer Hopwood, is roadsides and rights of way. She's been working with DOTs for probably over a decade. Those are great corridors for pollinators. Many of you know and support this idea, I know, because of the legislation that's being proposed in Minnesota. That actually, I believe the St. Croix Oak Savanna Chapter is one of the supporters of this. So I just thought I'd put it out there because we suggest this is a realm that we need to work in, and Minnesota's doing it. We recently came out with this visual to outline benefits of roadside habitat. I won't read off all of these benefits. A lot of them are probably intuitive to those of you in the audience, but they support pollinators, they support erosion control, they support, water infiltration and all those ecosystem services. One of the things that is on this list that I really appreciate is that number 9, natural heritage and tourism. We can showcase each region's natural beauty so that, Lady Bird Johnson said, I want Texas to look like Texas and Vermont to look like Vermont, and every state to look like itself. So that's one of the really compelling reasons, I think, to plant native vegetation or restore native vegetation on roadsides, is so that we can, support the wildlife that evolved in these natural ecosystems, and also for the aesthetic beauty. We have all kinds of guidance developed to support DOTs in this work. This is actually a rather, I wouldn't say it's outdated by any measure. It's still very relevant, but it was published a few years ago. All of the bullet points I have here are different chapters of the guide. So this is aimed at roadside maintenance crews and DOTs, how to protect the existing habitat, how to adjust your mowing practices to benefit pollinators, timing and that kind of thing to protect monarchs, ways to reduce impacts of herbicides and how to restore native plant communities, how to train staff and raise awareness about these things. So this is just one of those things to explore if you like to work with your local roadside managers, something to bring to their attention if it's not already on their radar. We also have I feel a little hesitant to actually bring this up because it's not published yet, but it's very soon to be published. These regional guidebooks developed by my Xerxes coworkers, 16 regional guides that are meant for local roadway staff, for transportation staff, to protect imperiled insects. And so it goes through specific lists of imperiled insects in all these different ecoregions and how to manage roadsides to comply with Endangered Species Act guidance. So yeah, I mean, I haven't even gotten a chance to look through these, but I just think it's really exciting that we're kind of on the cutting edge of this work. And then it's all tied together. There's 16 of these different guidebooks. And so there's like a roadmap, so to speak, to connect all of this habitat across the country. One other space that we've been doing a lot of work in natural areas lately, and is to protect all these rangelands from just kind of indiscriminate spraying of insecticides, which are meant to suppress grasshoppers, but also suppress all kinds of other insects. Yeah, I should say this is not my area either, but I'm just trying to align with some of the recommendations that are in the Forester paper, such as reducing cosmetic and broad spectrum pesticide use in natural areas. Xerxes has been on top of this as well. We've been actually filing lawsuits with the Center for Biological Diversity to limit this broad scale, just aerial spraying of grasslands, of rangelands, that yes, they are suppressing grasshopper and cricket outbreaks, but they are also killing, all kinds of other important food for wildlife, monarchs, pollinators. There should be a much more targeted way to work on grasshopper suppression, if that's such a damaging pest to some of these systems, and a way we should be promoting ways that are more wildlife friendly, more supportive of diversity. Again, just an example of things that we're doing that are outlined in this paper. Finally, I'll wrap it up with some parks work, because that sort of ties it back down to a more local scale. We also recommend working in parks and in the green spaces, and because those are natural areas as well. This is an image that I just took actually from our pollinator friendly parks guide, which I'll go back to in a second. I just love this. I mean, it seems really obvious to many of you, I'm sure, but the more plant species you add to a plant community, the more life you bring in. And this is just a really nice diagram to show to parks managers, probably not in Minnesota. I feel like Minnesota, we're beyond this level, I think, but it's still a really nice illustration to show that native plant communities bring in a lot of other wildlife. And this again is in the Pollinator Friendly Parks Guide. There's a lot of cool information in this guide that I think that would be relevant to a lot of Wild Ones work, actually. So just to wrap it up, these are the different areas that we covered. We talked about all the important work that you all are doing in gardens and on private properties, landscaping with native species. Talked about some of the work that could happen at local levels in cities and municipalities and nations, local states. I went through all the working land stuff. There's, I think the working lands thing may feel like you're distant. Like if you don't own property or if you aren't a farmer, it might feel like you can't impact that. But we all eat many times a day, and we all make choices with how we're eating and what kind of agricultural systems we're supporting with our forks. So that's the way that we all can tap into that kind of conservation work. And then I talked briefly about some of the natural areas and roadside stuff. So at the end of the day, maybe it's just the spring fever in me. And I just want to reinforce how important it is that all of you are working on garden scales. I put a quote here by Robin Wall Kimmerer from her book about how important it is to just plant a garden. This is my own daughter in our garden where we planted wild strawberries, and this is her wilderness, right? And when the strawberries grow, she is just like a little wild animal out there foraging. And I think this is such an important place for me to go at the end of the day. It nurtures my connection and inspires me and refuels me. So these garden spaces are so, so important. And I really value all of the work that you all at Wild Ones are doing to do those experiments for yourself, and then also promote this work in your landscapes. I'll end with a note that we have so many guidance documents for any particular issue that you're interested in. They're almost all available for free as downloadable PDFs on our website, xerxes.org. And we also have a lot of webinars recorded on YouTube, thanks to the pandemic. You can find us on all the social media platforms where you can share our campaigns and promote awareness of certain topics. Or learn. I mean, that's where I go to learn about some of the stuff that Xerxes is doing. And I should just acknowledge that we have so many supporters, many of which are you, our members. And we are so, so thankful for what you do to help us get this important collective work done. And I will maybe just leave it there with my email address so that if anybody wants to follow up with questions or reach out about a resource, feel free to.
Karin, after a minute, can you go back to the slide with highways for habitat?
Yeah.
And then come back to this?
Yeah, I'll just go back right now. Got a typo in there, but
there we go. Thanks.
Yeah.
We can open it up to questions now. I know that Jody had a question in chat, but there's if people want to unmute and ask questions, this is a good time to do that. So Jody, why don't you go first, unmute and ask your question. If you can unmute.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Yes, I was wondering about the how long before you can see the differences between the site preparation methods that you mentioned, and how does the sorghum crop thing work to prepare the site? You were experimenting with 2 different site preparation methods.
Yeah,
and one of them was sorghum crop. I'm converting my 2.5 acres into native prairie, and I'm very interested in these 2 methods.
Okay, yeah. Well, so site prep, the method for site prep, we always choose based on the existing vegetation there, and a combination of how much resources you want to or can invest and how much time you can invest. So generally speaking, conventional approaches using herbicide are more expedient. And organic approaches can often take multiple seasons to really be successful. I also really think hard about the type of plant that I'm trying to get rid of before we put in native species. So in this particular case, it was perennial rhizomatous, so species with long lateral underground roots that have been there for a really long time. Tilling those kinds of things up generally just breaks them up and gets them more excited. They just reestablish. So tillage wasn't a great option. And herbicide generally does work better on perennial plants that are undesirable. So that was kind of the go-to approach, but it's an organic farm, and we definitely wanted to explore some other alternatives. So we decided to use sorghum Sudan grass on that one slope, or on that one side. One, because it was closer to our vegetable fields, and two, because it was on a slope. So if you're spraying or tilling or doing anything that's just like exposing the soil for a long period throughout the growing season, then that makes it vulnerable to erosion. So we wanted to cover it up. So we wanted a high biomass producing crop. So sorghum Sudan grass does that. It can get, I don't know, 7 feet tall, and at a high enough seeding rate, you can really make it like a thick forest. So what we did was we hayed on that particular acreage. We hayed off the existing vegetation in, I think, May, did one pass of tillage so that we could get the sorghum Sudan grass seed in the ground. We drilled that in to minimize disturbance, drilled in that seed, let it go, all growing season. And so the idea is that some other crop is shading out weeds that would come up from the soil, and it's just like out competing anything else that would be trying to grow there. But the problem with some of those smother crops is that they create a whole bunch of biomass that needs to be removed prior to planting your native species. So one way you could do it on a smaller scale is to actually just cut it and rake it off the site if it were, I don't know, a quarter acre or less maybe. In this particular case, we had to cut it and bale it off, like hay it off, so that we could remove it. I've actually cut sorghum Sudan grass and burned it off with a prescribed burn as well. But some way you have to get that biomass off, because when you put your native seed down on the ground, you want seed to soil contact. So that's one of the tricks with those. But we seeded both of those sites, the herbicide site and the sorghum Sudan grass site, as a dormant seeding. So in November, and those were both no-till drilled in with a native grass seed drill. I hope that answers some of your questions. I'm happy to have a email exchange with you offline about this as well, but we have some prescriptions for how to do this in our organic site prep guide that you could look up, organic site preparation for wildflower establishment, on Xerxes website. That has it has like 8 different organic site prep approaches.
I will be definitely emailing you. Thank you so much for the information.
Yeah, no
Very
problem.
much appreciated.
So Roger, do we have other questions, or do people are welcome to unmute and ask questions if they have any? It's been a really nice presentation. Thank you, Karin.
You're welcome.
Howard, did you want to say anything about the Highways to Habitat bill? There was one mention here of just asking you to put that slide back up, and who to contact about supporting the bill.
Well, yeah.
Do you want me to put it back up?
Sure. The St. Croix Oak Savanna Chapter of Wild Ones is a co-sponsor of this Pollinator Friendly Alliance. It's been the main lead on this, but Karin, you probably know a little bit more about it than I do. It's got a House bill and a House file and a Senate file now. You can look it up. There's you can contact Pollinator Friendly Alliance to find out how you can help support the bill at this point. It's been through several hearings and it's passed through several hearings. So I don't know whether it's going to end up in its own bill or an omnibus bill at the end. And Karin, you may know more about that than I do, but it's for, I don't know, 10, 12, 14 years, there's not been any movement on pollinator friendly bills for one reason or another, but this particular legislature is very friendly toward many pollinator bills. There's about a dozen different pollinator bills that have a chance to get through that. And there's so many because they've been backed up for so long that they've not been allowed to. Usually it's they can't get a hearing in the Senate in the past, but there's a little bit friendlier Senate this year. But so there's a big flood of pollinator bills this year. And again, you can contact Pollinator Friendly Alliance to find out more about all the different pollinator bills that are being gone through the legislature this year. But you know, Karin, what are your thoughts and understanding about all that?
You know, I don't have a lot to weigh in on that personally. It's not, I don't want to sound like a cop out here, but this is not my scope of work. Typically when this type of policy work comes up in Minnesota, that's my coworker's role, is Sarah Foltz Jordan. She served on the governor's Pollinator Protection Committee, and I mean, what it comes down to is kind of like funding. Her funding sources are support this type of involvement. And so you probably actually know more about it than I do, unfortunately, Howard.
Well, I've said about what I know about it right now, but things are looking positive for a change, and we'll see. Yeah. We'll see at the end of the legislature which of these bills, if maybe most of them get through one way or another. So, other questions, Roger? Other thoughts? Other people? We've still got 30 people on the line. Do other people have questions or comments? You're welcome to unmute and ask.
And this is Roger again. Karin, in the chat, I've put that long list of web links that and also included directions for people to go to the bottom of the chat window. There's a 3 little dot icon in the bottom margin. If you click on that, it gives you an opportunity to save all the information in the chat, including all those links. Those will be copied to your computer or to your device, and you can sort through them at your leisure after we end the program. But is there anything, Karin, specifically there you might want to point people to, other than I did notice the first one is how to donate to Xerxes Society. So good on you for putting that at the top of the list.
But they're in order of how I presented them. So that there's a link, sometimes it can just look like a gobbledygook with all the different links. It'd be better if it was sort of like a title with a hyperlink. But this is what we have. And so there's the list of the Bumblebee Watch and the Atlas and, really anything that sparked your interest. Yeah, there's not any particular thing I think is worth pointing out. Well, there are a few things I didn't exactly call out, like some of those case studies are outlined in blog posts that give a little bit more information about how we were approaching things, different partners we were working with, especially in the Driftless area. I could only give a couple snapshots, but we worked with a network of partners in the Driftless area. Some people who are really interested in grazing, that nexus, want to know what the exact seed mix is that I worked with. I'm happy to, explain more about that. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's just the sort of mode, the MO for Xerxes is just to be rich in content. And so that's what I offered.
Any other questions or thoughts or comments for Karin?
Hi, Howard. Yes, this is Doreen. I have a question for Karin. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Firefly Atlases and the Bee Atlases? Is this a multiple times a year review of a certain site, or as I'm traveling across the country, can I do a survey in a particular area, or how does this work?
Yeah. I would have to explore the Firefly Atlas a little bit more, because fireflies, well, for one, our understanding about them is not as comprehensive as bumblebees, just from a baseline perspective. But I understand that they, there are like biodiversity hotspots. So there's going to be different survey effort across the United States. For southeastern United States is a really important space to do a lot of surveys. I would say in Minnesota, probably we won't have any organized survey effort. It'll be more important to just contribute incidental sightings in Minnesota, or wherever you're traveling, to contribute incidental sightings. I can't speak to the actual surveys and the trainings to do surveys for the Firefly Atlas. In Minnesota, and for all the Bumblebee Atlas projects, those are their trainings specific to a state, and you commit to a certain what they call a grid cell. In different part, they have the entire state gridded out into these different blocks, and you're kind of responsible for a section to survey a couple times a season. So I don't think you can do it kind of spontaneously. It's really quite a commitment for at least one season, as you do it at least 2 surveys, and then you submit the data at the end of the season. I don't think it would hurt to get connected to volunteers and other Bumblebee Atlases if you were like I love the idea of this. I don't know if this is anybody would ever do this, but to like route your tourism, your vacations, to contribute, like to a friend, like tag along with a friend who's participating in a Bumblebee Atlas in another state. You could certainly participate in that way, but I don't think it's I don't think you're going to spontaneously drop into Nebraska and complete a Bumblebee survey there for the Bumblebee Atlas. But incidental sightings wherever you are, no matter where you are in the United States, can always be uploaded to the Bumblebee Watch, which is very similar to like iNaturalist or other similar platforms. But the data are funneled sort of to the Fish and Wildlife Service to support conservation efforts. So yeah, I hope that answered your question.
Good, thank you. Margaret, you're still on. Why don't you unmute and talk a little bit about Highways for Habitat and other pollinator activities going on? You've been testifying before the legislature. Why don't you give a little bit of your experience? You can unmute.
I would just encourage everyone, find out who your legislators are. Go to the committee websites for the Environment, Natural Resources, Finance, and Policy committees, and use your voice. There are so many things, as you said, Howard, passing through right now. Just tomorrow, there's going to be some testimony. I'm going to, along with several others, testifying on the importance of having regulation around treated seeds, pesticide-treated seeds. Unfortunately, pesticides are regulated, but treated seeds treated with pesticides, are not regulated. And so there was a huge disaster in 21. Look it up. Mead ethanol plant disaster, Mead, Nebraska. Highways for Habitat, that's looking pretty good. We have good models in Iowa and Texas. They've been doing it for years. It saves a lot of money for the costs of if they're mowing, for example, the highways, or if they're spraying the highways. And it's really, really caught on. So we're using Iowa and Texas as models for how we have been trying to get this bill through the legislature. And like you said, Howard, it's doing well so far, but everything has to eventually go through the Senate. let's see, local control. There is one that is hoping to make it possible for communities to decide whether or not they want pesticides used in their communities. They don't have to, but if this bill passes, and I don't have all the numbers in front of me, unfortunately, but if this bill passes, it will mean that your community will have the opportunity to decide, do you want pesticides used in our public places, in our parks, in our yards? And then another one is allowing people to plant native habitats in their yards. And you had wonderful photographs of some of the people who have transformed their yards that way without being controlled by city ordinances. For example, that some cities will say, well, you can't have anything taller than so many inches. And that if that passes, then it'll mean that you are to be managing your natural native habitat, but that you can plant it on your boulevards and you can transfer your yard. You do not have to have a yard full of grass if you would rather have more habitat for pollinators. And I don't know how it stands this year, but look up lawns for legumes. There are certain seed mixes that you can, if you're lucky, you can get a grant for it. You have to apply for that though, or you can just look up those seeds and buy them yourself and put them in your yard. A Dutch white clover, self-heal, creeping thyme, and I think there's another one which you can't remember, but all of them grow fairly low to the ground. So you can still mow your grass and have a habitat that is not all that hard to put in and to take care of.
Yes, some of you might remember North Mankato harassing this gentleman trying to have a pollinator garden, and it took quite a bit for the city of North Mankato to back off. And I think some of the impetus for this protection of the ability just to have a pollinator garden is from the North Mankato example, and how bad things can be if the city is not very appreciative of the importance of pollinator gardens.
I think that's right. I think this has come from that. A lot of people, some people from the Twin Cities actually went down and tried to help in that situation, testifying before their city council. But there was a mature couple in their 80s. He was a retired physics professor, and they had a yard with fruit trees and other native plants, and neighbors were complaining. You know, you have to also educate your neighbors. One of the best things I did is bought a sign that says BEE, safe yard. And the first week I put it up, I had 2 people come by and say, how do you do this? And I said, what do you mean? I do what? Well, how do you keep your yard safe from bees? So now I consider it my educational tool. Can you believe it? So it's all about education and trying to be a good advocate. And if you're listening to this webinar, you already care. And everybody can do something.
Thank you, Margaret.
You're
Other
welcome.
people, other questions, other comments?
I
Please
had
unmute.
one other question for Karin, and perhaps for you too, Howard. We've talked a lot about growing stuff. What about a lot of cities insist that you rake your yards, get the leaves off, and if I understand correctly, that's where a lot of she had it in one of her slides, that's where a lot of our insects grow over the winter and nest is in our leaves and stuff. Is that being addressed also?
As part of this legislation, I don't think so directly, but yeah, there's.
No, I meant as far as the Xerxes Society and what they do when they talk to the cities and the states and the governments or whatever.
Okay, that's you, Karin.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of any particular bills or legislation that's really going through, but we have loads of guidance and campaign, kind of like social media campaign kind of materials for leave the leaves and natural nesting materials and signs. Like if you become a member, one of the signs you could get as a gift is a sign that says leave the leaves. And so you can start those conversations just like Margaret was having, you know, about just like the value of leaf litter and all the different animals that require leaf litter. We have one thing that I just had to cherry pick. I couldn't choose everything for this presentation, but there's a whole soil life kind of, or soil health kind of movement happening right now. A lot of people are interested in that. And, you know, Xerxes' contribution to that is this whole big book on soil organisms that, you know, a lot of people think about soil health and they think about just, you know, soil structure, that kind of thing. But there's this whole ecosystem under there. And one of the things that promotes a lively ecosystem down there is leaf litter, you know. And so two documents that I would point you to. I'm not very talented at multitasking here, but one is a farming with soil life guide from Xerxes. And it gives like most of the document is actually all these profiles of different invertebrates that live in the soil, and how you can protect them with different conservation practices. And then the other guidance document I would point you towards is called Natural Nesting or something like that. Let me see if I can pull it up really quick. You know, I think I have a photo of it actually. Let's see here. Now that I'm playing around my screen, I can't quite.
Well, you
share it.
only have 800 documents to try to find, so it's not a problem.
I think it's on here. Natural nesting and overwintering habitats, the lower left. It's a little blurry for pollinators and beneficial insects. So there's 8 or 10 different approaches. One of them is to leave the leaves, or to at least not shred them, or not put them in a landfill. You could, if you need to, in certain areas, you could pick them up and put them into a different place that is more acceptable. But yeah, there's a lot of different ways to protect overwintering and nest sites for pollinators. It's critical. It's critical. I mean, a lot of us equate pollinator conservation with flowers, but in order to grow the insects, we need to protect their nests as well.
Good. Other questions, other comments, other thoughts? We've kept Karin here a long time. She's been very generous with her time, but I know this is a fun topic. So
I know.
it's not like it's super painful, but it's still, we appreciate how long you've stayed with us. Other comments or questions? I know people in the chat are really appreciating you and the work that Xerxes is doing. So thank you for that.
Howard, this is Roger again with one other resource regarding leaving the leaves. If you Google soft landings.
Ah, yes, thank you. Good point.
It's an essay, I believe, originally by Heather Holm, who's a local author on habitat, environment, and insects. But it's been picked up and recopied. So it's posted multiple websites in different places on social media. But it's specifically, and I'm doing it in my yard, it's a recommendation for kind of an incremental addition to your landscape, where if you've got an oak tree, if you've got a natural tree that produces a lot of insect life, then you can create a garden around it simply by leaving the leaves underneath the tree, allowing the insects there to breed into overwinter, and kind of stop mowing or limited mowing in that area, and over time convert that just to a natural planting where the leaves fall and mulch. And in my case, I could rake leaves from the greater yard in towards the tree, so that there's about a 30-foot diameter circle around the tree that I'm converting from turf grass to, as Heather calls it, soft landings, for all the insects that breed up in the tree and then drop down into the leaf cover over the winter.
Well, good. Thank you, Roger. Appreciate it. Oh, and then Karin put the info in the chat. So thank you.
I'm not fast enough to get the link, but it's they have a lot of nice signage and plant lists and imagery for what it would look like, and it's a really great way to protect the entire life cycle of invertebrates that depend on those trees.
Wonderful. Other questions, other thoughts? We've kept Karin over a bit, but we really appreciate it.
I'm happy to have follow-up too via email
Right.
or phone conversations. And
Okay, well,
like I said, and I want to return the thanks too. I mean, it's a fun audience. I always think of Wild Ones as my choir, but you guys do such important work too. And we really depend on partners like you guys to carry out the mission on the ground.
yeah, it's important. So thank you.